I've been a trucker for many years now. One night, I was parked off an exit ramp at about 3 a.m., just starting my 10-hour break. The moon was full, high in the sky, and casting enough light to see everything around me. That's when I spotted something that stood out, a figure, standing still in the middle of a cut-off cornfield, not too far from where I was parked. It looked humanoid, but the way it was just standing there, completely motionless, made me think otherwise. I figured maybe it was something innocent. Probably just an old-timer who had put up a scarecrow for his grandkids or something like that. I shrugged it off and started watching YouTube videos in the cab, trying to unwind before turning in for the night. After a few minutes, I thought I saw some movement in my peripheral vision. I switched off my truck lights and peered back out into the cornfield. The figure was still there, but it seemed closer. Though honestly, I had no way to be sure if it had moved. Now I was starting to feel a little uneasy. But I reminded myself I was safe in my locked truck cab. The highway was dead quiet, only one car passing by every 10 minutes or so. Eventually, nature called and I had to pee. I didn't want to deal with the hassle of peeing in a water bottle, so I decided to get out of the truck. As I stepped out, I took another look at the figure. Still in the same place. Right where I figured it should be. Nothing seemed wrong at all. I walked around the front of my truck and stood between the trailer and the cab on the passenger side to do my business. I tried my hardest not to freak myself out. Just pee, I told myself. But I couldn't help it. I had to look again, just to make sure that figure was still there. Even though I hadn't actually seen it move, and it could very well have been in the same spot the whole time, curiosity got the better of me. I looked. And to my surprise, the figure was gone. There was nothing upright anywhere in the field. Just flat, empty land. My heart jumped. I rushed to finish up, jumped back into the truck, and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I had to get out of there. I didn't care about the time, or whether I was breaking any rules by driving during my break. I needed to leave. That place, especially that field, was seriously creeping me out, and there was no way I'd be able to fall asleep there. I drove for about 40 minutes before pulling into a Love's gas station. It was well lit and packed with other trucks. I finally felt safe again. Since then, I haven't stopped on an exit ramp to sleep. I don't know what I saw out there, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. But I'm not taking any more chances, not when it's that quiet and dark in the middle of nowhere. Because honestly, who knows what could happen out there? Back in 2003, I met a guy who told me he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside my state. We were kind of sheltered from the big crimes and crazy things that happened in the rest of the country. My now ex-boyfriend introduced me to the world of cross-country truck driving. In many ways, it was an incredible experience. We had fun, and I got to see most of the US. But it wasn't all great. Life on the road back then was different than it is today. We didn't have the kind of technology that people take for granted now. Our only forms of entertainment were watching one of a dozen or so DVDs, reading the same books over and over, or talking on the radio with other truckers. We usually chose the radio. That's how we met this one trucker, who we originally thought was a friend. His trucker handle was Maniac. We talked to him over the radio whenever our paths crossed, which was often since we traveled the same interstate route. There had been a lot of talk on the radio about murders happening at truck stops along our route. Nobody really knew if it was real or just stories truckers made up to pass the time. We kept hearing about them and eventually brought it up to Maniac. He just laughed. He said, "It must just be a story. If it were true, they would have caught the guy already. With how bloody and messy the murders are, I bet he wants to be caught." It was a strange thing to say, but Maniac was a strange guy. So it didn't seem out of character. One night, after dinner at a truck stop, my boyfriend and I were walking back to our truck. As we passed a row of parked trucks, I noticed one about 6 spots down from us. It was dark outside, but the truck looked either black or a dark blue, I couldn't really tell. I don't even remember what kind of truck it was, just that it looked menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was that if a driver wanted company, usually from lot lizards, which are sex workers, he'd park and leave the red reading light on inside the cab. This guy had the red light on. He was sitting in the passenger seat. Because of the light, I could see his face. It was a little distorted through the window, but the smile he gave me. It was the creepiest smile I've ever seen. Then, just like that, he shut the blinds. But I could still see the glow of the red light through the small porthole window in the door. There was a narrow slit in the curtain, and through it, I could see a dark shape. He was still watching us. Even though it was a warm night, a chill ran down my spine. I felt genuinely uneasy. We finally got back to our truck and turned on the radio to listen to the usual chatter. But that night, the talk was different. It was about an incident that had just happened. There was a dead lot lizard. One driver started explaining what he saw, but said a police officer had told him to keep his mouth shut. Being the nosy people we were, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to investigate. We dodged between trucks and managed to sneak up near the scene. You know how people say some things can't be unseen? Well, this was definitely one of those things. The woman, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer of a truck. When the driver pulled out of his space, she was literally torn apart. The driver, now sitting in the back of a police car, was sobbing uncontrollably. We could hear him through the closed door. He kept wailing that he had nothing to do with her being tied up, begging God for forgiveness. It seemed like he had simply failed to do a proper safety check and had no idea she was even back there. I ran from the scene, horrified. On my way back to our truck, I passed by the spot where the creepy guy had been parked. But he was gone. A little while later, the police came to our truck asking if we had seen anything suspicious. The only thing I could mention was that creepy man. I gave them his description and told them his truck was no longer there. The image of that night haunted me for days. It was burned into my memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. Eventually, after a few weeks, the nightmare faded from my mind. But 3 months later, something happened that brought it all rushing back. We had just arrived in New Orleans, and I was super excited to see the area, especially hoping to catch a show from Mardi Gras. We parked at this little truck stop. It wasn't much, more like a hole in the wall with a dirt lot and a single flickering light pole at one end. But it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was exactly where I wanted to go. After we parked, we heard our good friend, Maniac, calling out to us on the radio. His voice was loud and clear, which meant he had to be nearby. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot. We figured one of them had to be his. We had never actually met Maniac in person, so we thought maybe this was our chance. We asked if he wanted to meet up and grab some dinner. But Maniac refused. With a low chuckle, he said he rarely leaves his truck. He said he's always worried about getting caught. My ex-boyfriend immediately questioned him, asking what he meant by getting caught. Maniac answered, "Don't you worry about it. Just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all those other girls." We both stared at the radio in stunned silence. The signal strength was high, he had to be in the same truck stop as us. Then he spoke again. "You know, with all the bad things I've been doing at the truck stops, I like to play with the lot lizards before I torture them and destroy them." My ex and I sat frozen. Maniac kept talking. "They shouldn't be defiling themselves with what they do. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones, the ones that plague humanity." By the time he was done speaking, he was yelling. His voice grew louder and more intense, just as a truck was driving slowly past the truck stop. That was the first and only time I ever saw fear in my ex's eyes. Tears started to well up, and for the first time, I was truly scared. As we sat there in silence, a dust cloud rolled up the road outside the truck stop. Then we saw it. A dark, black, menacing truck with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by, moving slow. As it passed the nose of our truck, we saw the driver clearly. It was him, the same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. The one from the night the lot lizard was murdered. He smiled at us. That same sick, disgusting smile. Then he picked up his mic and said over the radio, "Be safe out there." As he pulled away from the lot, we noticed something painted on his driver's side door. In bold, bright red letters, it said, "Maniac." As far as we knew, there had been 7 murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had been at it? I don't know if that guy was ever caught. I assumed so, since we gave the police his truck description. But deep down, I'm not sure. My ex-boyfriend and I took a break from trucking after that. But we ended up going back on the road for one more summer. The second time around, I wasn't making friends on the road. I kept a 6-inch blade with me at all times. Just in case I ever ran into Maniac again. Back when I was in college, my car broke down in the dorm's parking lot. It had to be towed about 20 miles to a dealership, so I called a local tow company. When the truck arrived, I decided to ride with the driver so I could talk to the dealership about getting a rental. The guy talked non-stop the entire drive, about whatever popped into his head. I tried to be polite. It was a 20 to 30 minute ride, and he was doing me a favor. But after we left the dealership with no luck on a rental, his tone changed. The conversation turned to his ex and how she had done him wrong. I was stuck in the truck with him, so I nodded and gave short answers, trying to deflect as much as I could. I was starting to regret riding along. He had the upper hand. I had no idea how uncomfortable it would get. When we finally pulled back into the dorm lot, I got out and went inside, relieved it was over. I figured that was the end of it. I wasn't planning to need a tow again anytime soon. But a couple days later, I started getting texts and calls from an unknown number. Turns out, the driver had copied my contact info from the tow request form. I hadn't given it to him directly, and the company certainly shouldn't have let him access it. Then came the drive-bys. He would stop by the dorm to see if I was home, knocking on the door or just idling in his truck nearby. After about a week of this, I was beyond freaked out. I called the towing company to speak with the owner. He brushed it off, saying maybe the driver just thought I was nice and that I shouldn't be so stingy with him. I had to tell him, firmly, that I was considering filing a restraining order before he took it seriously. That experience changed how I handle home service calls. I think about it every time I'm asked for my personal contact info, and I've never ridden in a tow truck since. Just a few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were nearing the end of a long road trip with our dog. We pulled into a rest stop off the freeway to stretch our legs and let the dog out. There were no cars in the lot, just 3 big semis parked in a line. My girlfriend headed to the restroom while I leashed up the dog and stood outside. As she walked toward the building, I heard someone yell behind me. It was one of the truckers, sitting in the cab of his rig with the window rolled down. He was trying to get my attention. The engine was loud, so I yelled back, "What?" He yelled something back, but I couldn't hear him clearly. This went on 3 more times. I kept asking, "What?" and motioned that I couldn't hear. He started to look annoyed. Curious, I walked a little closer, about halfway between our car and his passenger side door. "What did you say?" I asked. "I lost my phone," he said. "Can you help me look for it?" The request caught me off guard. He'd only seen me for a few seconds, and he was already asking for help. I figured maybe he just wanted me to call his phone. Where'd you lose it? I asked. In my truck, he replied, his tone suddenly weird. Can you come up and help me look for it? That's when alarm bells went off. There was no way I was climbing up into a stranger's cab. Even though I'm a strong guy, who knows what could have happened? I told him no. He stared at me. You won't help me look for it? My adrenaline kicked in. I yelled, get out of here, in a more aggressive tone, even though I had nothing on me to defend myself. I threw the dog back into the car and pulled out my phone, pretending to call the police. He started driving away, but then stopped again. Are you sure you can't help? He asked. This time, I screamed, really screamed, for him to leave or I'd call the cops. That finally worked. He stepped on the gas and took off onto the freeway. My girlfriend came out of the restroom seconds later and asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I don't know if I overreacted. Maybe he was harmless. But something felt off. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I'd climbed into that truck. To get to the restrooms at that rest stop, you had to walk over a hill. From where we parked, we couldn't actually see the building. Since it was so late at night, my husband decided to walk with me most of the way, just to make sure I got there safely. I wasn't particularly worried, but I appreciated the gesture. After I finished in the restroom, I came back out to walk our dogs and let my husband take his turn. Even though it was late and we were a bit cut off from the well-lit area of the rest stop, I still didn't feel uneasy. I'm a small woman, but our dogs are German Shepherd mixes, big, alert, and very protective of me. As I was walking them and letting them sniff around, I noticed one of the semis parked on the far side of the lot suddenly started up. It began slowly driving in my direction. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was still on the trucker side, and I figured he was just heading back to the freeway. I cleaned up after the dogs, grabbed 2 poop bags, and walked toward the trash can. As I got closer, I was suddenly blinded by an intense light. Bright headlights aimed straight at me. I looked up and saw it was the same semi-truck. He had pulled up as close as the truck lot allowed to the car lot, and was shining his brights directly into my eyes. I was irritated. Why would someone do that? It felt intentional. I tossed the poop bags into the trash and started walking back toward our car. As I did, the trucker began flashing his lights at me, over and over again. I was only a few feet from the car, starting to get more frustrated, wondering what his problem was. That's when he started slowly creeping his truck toward me again, still flashing his lights. At that point, my dogs immediately picked up on my unease. Their ears perked, and they turned to face the truck, alert and tense. I finally made it to the car, but the guy didn't stop. He kept flashing his lights and inching forward. I don't scare easily, so I stood my ground. I just stood there and stared him down, trying to make it clear that I wasn't intimidated. Finally, he stopped flashing his lights. I figured it was over. I reached into my pocket and started pulling out my keys. But then my dog stiffened beside me and let out low growls. I looked back toward the truck. The driver's side door was open now, and I saw a boot starting to step out. I couldn't believe it. I thought, is this guy serious? Just then, my husband reappeared from behind me. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders and, without hesitation, flipped the trucker off. The foot quickly disappeared back into the cab. The driver slammed the door and pulled out of the lot fast. I told my husband everything, the lights, the creeping, the way he kept approaching. That's when my husband explained something I hadn't known. Some truckers use flashing headlights as a way to flag down women at rest stops. I was disgusted. The guy must have assumed I was alone, based on the layout of the lot. But I wasn't dressed in any way that would suggest I was looking for attention. I was wearing layers because it was cold, and we were clearly driving a newer car. We weren't loitering or parked suspiciously. And what really creeps me out is that I don't think he would have taken no for an answer. Why else would he have started getting out of the truck after I had clearly ignored him? Whatever his intent was, the whole thing gave me chills. He wasn't acting right. He was aggressive, and clearly off. To any women out there traveling solo, please, be careful at rest stops. Not everyone there has good intentions.